Coming up next on the Wet Fly Swing podcast.
Her agent called me and said, well, Meryl would really like to rent your cabin for the summer. I had 50 nights booked with my fishermen already that I'd been talking to for the last 10 years. Hey, we're going to have a cabin eventually. And I had to decline Meryl Streep staying with us. But what can you do? I mean, I'm not going to turn down guys, repeat customers that have been coming year after year, waiting to stay in the cabin, telling them Hollywood came to town. So
that was Dave Blackburn with one of his Hollywood stories, the Kootenai Big Bull Trout, and his Bluegrass band, today on The Swing.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how you doing today? Thanks for stopping by the show. We've grown this podcast grassroots style with one share from one listener. It started way back in the day, a number of years ago, and we've been getting amazing feedback and shares over the years. If you get a chance, this is the best way that we can help share and grow this show and connect and help other fellow anglers out there. Click that share button in your app right now, and let's do this. Thanks in advance for your support. Today's episode is sponsored by Range Meal Bars. Each bar is 700 calories and fits easily into the pocket of your backpack, vest, or wherever you need. Range bars are made using only the highest quality gluten-free ingredients, and they are the most convenient and compact way to get out the door and on the river. You can support this podcast and a great local company right now by heading over to wetflyswing.com/range. That's RANGE. Range Meal Bars, a legitimate meal in your pocket. Today's episode is sponsored by Eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton Territory, Idaho's most renowned zone for fly fishing. From the Henry's Fork to the South Fork of the Snake and all the high alpine lakes and streams in between, Yellowstone Teton Territory provides anglers and other outdoor enthusiasts with all the information they need to plan their next big trip. You can visit wetflyswing.com/Teton right now to get the full list of outfitters, lodges, fly shops, and all kinds of inspiration to get you started on your next trip to Eastern Idaho. That's Teton, Teton, wetflyswing.com/Teton. Dave Blackburn takes us into the Kootenai and the history and fishing that makes this place so very unique. We discover how he fell into this part of the country and that story. It's a good one. What a multi-trip looks like here, and his cabins, his lodges. He's got some really good stuff. Dave is a name I've been hearing about for a while. And we also find out which species you may have not thought about that is the size of a car and is the reason for this being a protected area and the quality of the fishing out in this area. Plus, did I mention he plays the banjo really well?
I return to that old cabin home with a sigh. I've been longing for days gone by. When I die, won't you bury beneath that old willow tree? Make my resting place beneath that hill so high. Oh, I love those hills of old Virginia. In those blue ridge hills I did roam. When I die, won't you bury me on that old mountainside? Away in my blue ridge cabin home.
Time to finally dig into it, the Kootenai, with Dave Blackburn from GoFlyFishMontana.com. How's it going, Dave?
it's going well. It's just getting light, looking out my window on the river, and it's going to be a good day.
Yeah, this is great. You're up in the on the Kootenai River. I'm assuming you're right there. We're going to dig into that river. It's another one of those big names. You know, you're in a big area, Montana, for fly fishing, and there's so many rivers around. I think the last guest we had on was a little bit south of you down there, and I asked him, I said, does it feel like you're in a hot spot for fly fishing? Like, does it feel really, that sort of thing, like busy? Because it seems like it is a very known place. What's your take on that?
Well, the Kootenai, it's a river that it's hard to get to, first of all, because our closest airport is 2 hours away. And before more flights were coming into Kalispell, everybody had to come through Spokane, which is a 3-hour drive. And, it isn't like you fly right into Great Falls and a half an hour later you're fishing the Missouri. This is a place that it takes pretty much a whole day to get to.
Yep, that's right. So it's not an easy one to get to. Once you get in there, we're going to talk about kind of getting there, what it's about. We'll go into some history. There's some interesting stuff about the native rainbows there. But let's take it back real quick. Just start to set the stage of you yourself in fly fishing. So tell us how you first got into fly fishing. Then we'll take it into the Kootenai Angler and everything you have going.
Well, I grew up in western Pennsylvania, close to the Maryland border. So we had a lot of the limestone trout streams. And my sixth grade teacher taught fly tying classes. And when I was probably in the fourth grade, my brothers were in sixth grade and seventh grade, and they took this class, and I just tagged along with them. And I started tying flies when I was like 9 years old. I think my first pair of hackle pliers was a clothespin. And we had these vices from herders that were $1 a piece. So I started there, and of course had an interest in the outdoors growing up there. I fished and hunted as a child, and ended up going to forestry school in West Virginia University, and they had a placement program for foresters. If you wanted to work out west, you could. And that's right after the movie Jeremiah Johnson was released. And any kid from back east that hunted and fished would want to go see the Rocky Mountains after watching that movie. So I ended up going out there and working the summers, and worked seasonally in the Bighorn National Forest. I was a backcountry ranger in the Cloud Peak primitive area my last 2 seasons, and met my wife there, whose father was working on Libby Dam, which was completed in 1974. But there was a lot of projects that were continuing after that. They had a floating boat ramp up above the dam and a whole bunch of other projects after the impoundment was complete. So he was up here working, and my wife said in Wyoming, she said, let's go up and see my family. And I figured, well, it's going to be like a 3 or 4 hour drive. It's probably up above Billings somewhere. I didn't realize Libby, Montana is basically, 600 miles from Billings. And you're just going from one end of the state way up to the northwest corner. And so, 12 hours later, we pull in, it's dark. I can hear the river. And the next morning I get up, and this big, huge river is staring me at the face. It reminded me of a river I fished in Pennsylvania that had a big dam on it. And it was the Kokanee, where they used to do whitewater trips. And I said, are there trout in here? And she said, yeah, I think there are. It was in November, because it was after I guided elk hunters down in Wyoming during that time. And that's where I started my guiding experience. And I got up that morning and put on a sweater, walked up to what we call the home pool now. And there were fish rising, and they were taking these little blue quills, kind of a Baetis type, mayfly. And I caught, some smaller fish, but there were some larger fish that were out. I couldn't quite reach them. So I went around the other side. I walked out around into the middle of the river. I'm waist deep. And I hooked these fish that just straightened my hook out like a hairpin. I was using 94833, which back in the day, Mustad hooks were the only ones you tied on. The 94833 was a super light wire hook that worked great for hatchery fish in Pennsylvania, but for these big, wild, football-shaped rainbows, I had to go back to the house, retie a nymph pattern on a heavier hook, and I went back out there and started catching these 3-pound rainbows that were like 14, 15 inches that would just, take you into your backing. And it was like a religious experience. And it was like, wow, all I was used to catching with hatchery fish in Pennsylvania and some stock fish in the Bighorn High Lakes, which were mostly cutthroats that didn't really fight anything like these native rainbows.
Right. Yeah. The native rainbows. And so, yeah, it's good stuff. The old Mustad. So you probably went back to like threw on like a 9671 or something like that.
Right.
3906B. Yeah. Right on. And I want to go back to the Jeremiah Johnson, just so we don't miss that. I always love to throw a link in the show notes to that. So was that the Robert Redford? Was he in that one?
That was the Robert Redford movie. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Classic. Okay. Yeah. We'll put a link in the show notes so somebody can take a look at that. That's a great one. So basically, yeah, I mean, again, Robert Redford, we take this back. It's been so funny over the years because a river runs through it, you probably remember that as
Of
well.
course,
Another Robert,
yes.
and the impact of that, right? How many people, probably the same as you, right, brought him out to Montana or at least fishing it
Sure.
around the country because of this guy. I'm hopeful to get Robert Redford on the podcast. We haven't done it yet, but you know what I mean? It's one of those goals for us. So the Kootenai, so tell us this about the Kootenai. It sounds, you've got these native strain of rainbow. First place, like you're way up in this corner. What is it? What's it flowing into? Which way is it going? Talk about that a little bit.
Well, basically, it comes out of British Columbia and it flows back into British Columbia. It flows south, and basically the impoundment Libby Dam was created in '74, and it backs up 90 miles of river. And so what happens is we have 90 miles of lake in front of us with kokanee salmon in, and some rainbows and cutthroats and that type of thing. But the river actually flows north and south until it hits the corner right by our property, which is the first private land below the dam, which is 13 miles just north of Libby. And Dave Thompson was one of the British cartographers that first mapped out this area for the Hudson's Bay Company. And so in the corner of the maps that he made, which are still, very accurate with considering he just used a compass and a sextant, he named this one area Big Bend. And it's basically where the Kootenai changes from a southerly flow to a straight westerly flow, and it flows through Libby, Troy, and then the Idaho Panhandle, enters the Idaho Panhandle and turns north and goes back up into Kootenai Lakes, British Columbia. And it ends up flowing into the upper Columbia in British Columbia at Castlegar. So the whole river is 385 miles in length, and of course 90 miles is impounded. So, and we're the largest headwater tributary of the Columbia River. So that's why we have the Columbia interior red bands, which are an isolated steelhead strain that used to, an anadromous fish used to be, speared at Kootenai Falls by the Kootenai Indians.
Right. And that's the connection that I'm down in Oregon, which is, again, the Columbia is a massive, massive river. And we, on the Deschutes, have the red band, which is this amazing strain. And that's essentially the same fish, the same river, same basin.
Yep.
Just you're a few, I'm not sure how many hundreds or thousands of miles upstream you are from where we are, Deschutes, but you're way up there.
Quite a few. Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. So essentially, I mean, you're in that part of Montana that a lot of people don't think about, that there is a connection out to the west, essentially to the ocean, right? Historically, before all the dams that you had, there was probably steelhead coming up into your river.
There were, yep. And there's some old historical photos of Indians spearing fish at Kootenai Falls, and they would use, of course, the big nets and stuff. And the Kootenai also has a small population of white sturgeon, which has really kind of helped us control the erratic power flows that first happened when the dam was complete, so.
Oh, right. So now it's pretty much a nice tailwater. You've got a tailwater fishery. You guys are.
It's a great tailwater. Yes.
With some good fishing. Well, let's dig into that a little bit, not just on the area. So if somebody was going, I always like to think of it as a trip, if we're sitting, I know you guide up there, so you guys do this for a living. What does that look like if somebody's calling you in, right, saying, hey, we want to go fish and get some of these big rainbows? I'm not sure how big they are, but what do you tell them? When's the best time to start think about coming to kind of a May sort of thing, May, June?
Well, we have a pre-runoff. The runoff really is held back by the reservoir, but because white sturgeon are endangered, they're under ESA regulations with the white sturgeon being an endangered species, that they have to run the river now like a natural hydrograph. So when the flows are high and coming into the reservoir, they mimic those flows. And usually what happens is, as soon as the river hits 50 degrees Fahrenheit, they will increase the flows to maximum powerhouse, which is, the flows range from 4 to 25,000. And so that's about, 4 to 6 feet of elevation change, depending on the width of the river and that type of thing. But what happens is they'll run it usually about, it depends on how much snowpack we have, but usually they'll run it 2 to 3 weeks at that maximum flow, so that the sturgeon down in Idaho know when it's time to spawn. So that actually has benefited, from the old days, because they just started doing this probably, I would say, between 15 and 20 years ago. Prior to that, like in the late 80s and early 90s, they ran the thing like a water faucet. They would crank it down at night to minimum flow, and to increase power production and maximize their dollars, they would increase it to 20,000 during the day and then drop it back down at night. Now, imagine what that does to net spinner caddis, so we were just basically wiping out our insects. And I went to a meeting with the technical management team along with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And this is when sturgeon were first being listed as endangered. And basically, they agreed to basically not do power peaking anymore, what they call now load factoring, which is a softer term. But power peaking was just, when they run it like a water faucet. They do some load following now during the winter time, but usually it's not quite as dramatic to the below 9,000 CFS is where the rocks start showing, and that's where all the insects are. They'll do load following now above that in the winter time, probably, from 10 to 20,000 through the winter a little bit. And it doesn't affect the insect population as much as them doing it during the summer,
Yeah, gotcha. Can you fish this thing? Is this like year round because of the tailwater?
Yep, it's a year round. It doesn't freeze. We have no, back in the old days prior to the dam, the old timers, I of course wasn't here then, but they said the river used to have a lot of what they would call periwinkles, which was just the slang term for the big, stoneflies, the big pteronarcis and all that. But now, since we don't have those ice scouring flows, the bottom of the river doesn't have the big, large pores. And so the stoneflies, there's a few of them around, but they've really diminished in population. And so being replaced by caddis and some smaller mayfly species, we got a pretty good, the green drakes have made a really good comeback from when they used to do the power peaking, which pretty much wiped them out. But now we're seeing, 2 to 3 weeks of pretty good green drake activity in the evenings is when they come off,
Oh, right.
Yep.
What time of year is that when the green drakes are coming off?
Usually around the second, third week in July is when we see those. And some of the tributaries, they'll be a lot sooner than that, but on the Kootenai, it's a little bit later. And, we had some of them, hatching in September last year. So tailwaters can be a little bit fickle in terms of timing.
Right. What is the Kootenai River, Kootenai area, what is it known for? Why? Because I definitely, like we said at the start, there's a lot of, it's a very known, is it known for the fishing more? Or there's some other things out there it's known for?
Well, the Kootenai, the original name came from the Kootenai Indians, and the term was what the French called them because the French trappers loved the deer robes that the Kootenai Indians would tan. And so that Kootenai name basically means deer robes, and which is, just that came from an archaeologist that worked for the Forest Service that gave us historical lessons on the river during the time that, my guides like to tell stories and all that type of thing. But the Kootenai, we were the main supply port to Western Canada before the Transcontinental Canadian Railroad was, joined. And basically there were stern wheel steamboats that would dock right across the river from our property at a place called Jennings. There was an old river town there right at the end of the 1890 to roughly 1915. And they ran, there's a railroad that came in here. They would load up the stern wheel steamboats and head up to Nelson, British Columbia when the river was high. Of course, they couldn't do it when it was low, but usually they would run those steamboats up until mid-July, most years. And then the river would drop to where they couldn't get them up there. But that's one neat thing about, the Kootenai. And we have some historical photos of the stern wheel steamboats in our restaurant.
Oh, wow. That's right. So you have we're going to talk about your restaurant, talk about more on what the trip looks like. But the history thing is kind of interesting. Well, it's really interesting, what you have going, because I think that's part of it. The Kootenai is just this famous, area from the Native Americans through to that history you're talking about.
Right.
Sounds like there's lots to do up there on top of fly fishing, right? So if you were to go there on a trip, you can not only do some fly fishing, but there's some other things to do around town.
Yeah, there's a historical museum, and there's the Cabinet Mountain Wilderness, which is 160,000 acres of grizzly bear habitat, which is designated roadless, and there's a trail system through there. It's like a mini version of Glacier National Park. So And what they've done is some of the problem bears from Glacier that they didn't want to euthanize, they would bring over to Libby and the Yak, and they would drop them off because we had such a low population base. But we actually did have our first mauling, which was several years ago. I think she was on the Meat Eaters podcast, and a little gal was doing some sampling up in the cabinets and surprised a subadult male and knocked her around and bit her skull. But she lived through it. She lost hearing in one ear, but it was one of those things where they put one of those bear hair trap things too close to a creek, and so you couldn't really make noise when the bear happened to be laying down there. But that was our, basically, we've had some bluff charges and stuff up until that point. But this little gal walked all the way out about 3 miles to where her pickup was, and then drove down to the road with her head, held in a sweatshirt. And it's a pretty amazing story. And she's back doing it again. So.
Oh, wow. She didn't give it up. Didn't scare her away. That's pretty amazing.
Yep.
Yeah. So it is a pretty, a cool area. You've got some stuff going on there. Let's take it back to that trip. So if we were coming in and I was, we're calling you up and we want to do a trip out there, what do you tell somebody that says, hey, we want to go out to the Kootenai and do some fly fishing? What's the first thing? Where do you start there?
Well, basically you tell them, about the seasonal progression of the hatches and different things like that. Like I said, the pre-runoff before they have the river up at maximum flow, and even at maximum flow at 25,000, I'd be out of business if I couldn't produce fish during those high flows. But it is a kind of an intimidating river at those high flows. But we have pre-runoff where we have, some of the smaller stonefly species will be coming off, March browns. We have blue wing olives and that type of thing. And then moving into, as the river starts to drop, usually by the first part of July, they have the river down to about 10 or 12,000. Then we start getting into the very heavy, consistent pale morning dun hatches and the caddis hatches. We have what we call a happy hour hatch, where all the caddis, they have their mating swarms, and then they'll come down and lay their eggs on the river during the time the sun sets and when it gets completely dark. And that's a great time to swing caddis with you could swing we use an X caddis with a little pupa behind it, and it's just amazing. We have one rock where we were fishing 2 flies. Each angler had a caddis with the pupa on, and one of them had a soft tackle instead of the pupa. But we call it quad rock because we had doubles hooked up on both rods, and
right,
that was pretty amazing. Of course, we didn't land them because you get into those 12 to 15 inch fish and they'll rip you a new one even on 4X tippet if you hook 2 up at the same time.
Oh yeah. Are you guys doing most of this like floating fishing out of the boat, or is this like walk and wade?
Yeah, it's float fishing. You can do some walk wading at the lower flows, but and when we first started guiding here, we would basically just, the river would be at minimum flow through most of the season because they ran it a lot differently back then. And so you could actually, do a lot of walk wading along with just, drifting along, and then you get out and work the water that way. But now, since the flows are up higher, it's more conducive to just float fishing. And, we're starting to do, we're adding swing and Euro techniques to that. And, I think we're one of the few outfits where we're actually doing some Euro from a drifting boat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so it's pretty cool to see. I mean, we don't have you can't really do it where there's a lot of wood in the river, but, in a freestone situation where you have, just a lot of cobble on the bottom, you can get away with drifting. And, those Euro nymphs are designed to float with the hook point up, so you're not snagging a whole lot. But boy, if you get into a lot of wood, you really can't do it when you're drifting. But it's very effective. I mean, I couldn't believe, when you don't have fish, we prefer dry fly fishing, or, is what most clients like to do, see those fish coming up. But when they're not coming up, the Euro technique has been very effective, amazingly effective.
Today's episode is sponsored by Trxstle, who has earned an exceptional reputation over the past few years in the fly fishing industry due to the popularity of their telescopic fly rod roof racks and statement-making Artist Series apparel lines. Their latest release for 2023 is the Jerian Universal Bike Rack Packing System, a brand new way to transport your fly fishing and outdoor gear. The Geryon will give any modern bike the ability to bring 30 pounds of gear with its front and rear articulated racks. Whether you ride a full suspension mountain bike, an e-bike, or even a carbon fiber road bike, the Geryon will get you and your fishing gear further faster and have much more fun along the way. I can tell you this has been a big struggle for me. I've been riding my bike, both road bikes and mountain bikes, and had lots of issues over the years packing my gear, whether that's crappy storage on the back or a trailer that's just too big and bulky. So I'm excited to share this packing system, which is going to make it way more convenient and accessible to get out to the places you need to go. You can learn more about how Trxstle is transforming the way you access your favorite water, backcountry hunting zones, and camping spots. Head over to wetflyswing.com/Trxstle right now and be the first on the water and the farthest upstream and away from the crowds. That's Trxstle, Trxstle. Trxstle, live your pursuit. You know, we actually have a Euro nymphing school we're putting together down south of you, and we've got the couple of the gold medal winners, or at least the folks that are, kind of way better than myself on that. They're teaching the course, but it's pretty interesting because, it's super effective. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it just depends on what you want to do, right? Like, do you want to fish streamers? Do you want to dry fly fish? What do you find that people, when they come up to your area, they feel like they want it? Is dry is the first thing they're really interested in getting into?
Dry fly fishing is definitely the most popular. When people hear that we have, season-long dry fly fishing, they really like that. A lot of people don't like staring at bobbers, and it's been it's a very effective way to fish. But we teach dry fly fishing and making proper drifts and making the right kind of casts from a drift boat and that type of thing. So it is by far the most popular way to fish. However, with some of the bigger fish, that the Kootenai does have the state record rainbow now.
Oh, it does?
Yes, it does. It was a 29-pound fish caught by a guy from Kalispell up right below the dam. But I want to talk about fish size right off the bat. Now, keep in mind that the Kootenai is, it's a tailwater fishery, but it's a glacier-fed system. So it isn't like, the tailwater like the Missouri and the Bighorn, where there's all kinds of biomass and the nutrient load is very high in those rivers, where the Kootenai has a low nutrient load. In fact, Libby Dam is a big nutrient trap. So our growth rate is much slower than those other rivers. On the Missouri, for instance, I have a good friend that started his business about when I did, and they're getting a 2-year-old fish is 14 inches long. On the Kootenai, a 2-year-old fish is like 8 inches or 9 inches. And so our average fish, we're seeing a lot of 3-year-olds, which are 12 to 13 inches in length, but we don't have the average 16 to 18-inch fish that you see in the Bighorn and the Missouri. But our fish are strong and they're a whole different strain. But we also have the biggest rainbows in Montana, simply because there's Kokanee salmon above Libby Dam in the reservoir. And so they come out of the wicket gates of the turbines. Some of them come down out stunned. Some of them are cut in half. And so these big rainbows just grow to enormous proportions up there. And there's guys that are using, they still allow bait fishing up there. And the whole upper river above the Fisher River Bridge is it's closed to harvest unless you catch a fish over 28 inches. So we have a 3-mile section that's like a trophy section. But there's guys that are putting rapalas, fishing it off the Dave Thompson Bridge at night with 8-inch jointed rapalas and catching big rainbows. But actually, there's quite a bit of mortality in those. And so therein lies, we have a smaller average fish than the rest of Montana, but we have some great streamer fishing for rainbows, and we can't purposely catch bull trout, but we have incidental catches on bull trout, all the time. In fact, we were out about a week or so ago. One of the guides and I were just up there burning off some cabin fever, and he hooked a nice 12-pound bull trout. You just take a quick picture and put it back. We have probably the healthiest bull trout population in Montana.
That's right, and bull trout, and so they're a species you can't really target.
You can't target them, but by using the sinking lines that we use for the big rainbows and so forth, you'll catch almost 50% bull trout along with the rainbows. And that proportion changes, that the bull trout population is very cyclic. And what's cool about them is, of course, they're a native fish as well. And one of the biologists, they told me that they put a transmitter on a bull trout in the Troy Reaches, which is below Kootenai Falls. Kootenai Falls was thought as a natural barrier because there's no sturgeon above the falls, but a bull trout that had a transmitter inside went all the way up through Kootenai Falls, probably when the river was up high, and was right below Libby Dam. So that's pretty cool. And River Wild, the movie with Meryl Streep, was filmed at Kootenai Falls. And of course, more recently, The Revenant, where he went over Kootenai Falls with the buffalo hide, that was in the DiCaprio movie just recently.
Good. We'll add some more movies to our mix. We'll have a nice mix of movies in the show notes here.
Yeah, actually, another movie that was made in the 80s. It's the firefighter movie with Holly Hunter and Richard Dreyfuss. And I met Spielberg when they were making that movie.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
There you go. I think I found it. Yep, Spielberg. Why do I not remember this one? It was called Always?
Always, right. I was going to say that, right.
So that's a good one to watch. I definitely missed that one. I'll put that one in maybe.
Yeah, and that was actually a remake of A Guy Named Joe, which was about a World War II fighter pilot with Spencer Tracy and Irene Dunn, where he was killed in World War II and then was kind of a ghost that would come back and hang around Irene as she's dating this younger guy. And so Richard Dreyfuss was the bomber pilot that died saving some firefighters. And so he came back and ghosted Holly Hunter as she was dating one of the younger pilots.
There you go.
Pretty cool movie. I got to teach him how to cast on set one day. And so he's telling him how to put the fire in the smoke while I'm, showing him how to cast. Pat Kehoe, as executive producer, fished with me all the time when they made that movie. And I never saw guys that were able to drink as much beer as that film crew could drink and still fly fish coherently.
Oh, really? So is that Dreyfuss? Was Dreyfuss a big beer drinker as well?
No. It was Pat Kehoe, his executive producer. Spielberg never got out on the river with us, but I took his executive producer. But I met him on the set, and he wanted to know how to fly cast, so that was fun.
Gotcha. What about John Goodman? It looks like John Goodman was in it too.
Yeah, I never got to meet Goodman, but I had lunch with Dreyfuss and Holly Hunter.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
What was Dreyfuss? What was he like?
Oh, he was just popping one-liners all the time, and he was just a happy-go-lucky type guy. He was pretty funny. Yep, that was, I think, his next movie after Jaws or something like that.
Oh, right. Yeah, Jaws. That's right. Gosh, there you go, Dreyfuss. Nice. Well, good stuff. So, you have the bull trout, so that's another cool thing, which it sounds like you catch frequently out there just fishing. Like, are you catching those on when you're doing streamers or on all different techniques?
Well, we actually, sometimes you can catch a small one just fishing a hopper, but, they'll take nymphs below hopper droppers. They'll take nymph rigs, they'll take streamers, and some of the rainbows that are approaching, we have a club called the 30-inch club, which we have several customers that are in that, where they catch fish over 30 inches. And, we're using some big, 5 to 6 inch long streamers, because we've had rainbow and bull trout attacks where they come in, and I've had a big rainbow come in and try to eat an 18-inch rainbow that was a good size fish. And so you'll have these, anytime a fish is struggling, the higher end predators, that's kind of a tip off. It's just like a wounded elk with wolves, it kind of keys that predator instinct. So, we do have these big fish that come in. And I remember one year, I think all the guides had at least 6 or 8 bull trout attacks. In fact, a funny story was when I had a marine biologist that studied great white sharks and off the coast of California. And, he's bringing in a fish, and roughly a 3.5 foot bull trout came in right next to the boat and made a swath at the fish that he was just lifting out of the water. And he just about went over the other side of the boat because of the reflex from working with the great whites.
Jeez.
Yep. He recently, we did a bonefish exploratory trip to Palau, where he did his master's in marine biology. And that was an interesting trip.
Right. Wow. This is cool. And the bull trout, you can just, like you say, you're fishing for, you can't target them, but you catch them frequently, just fishing for rainbows.
Right. And, you just keep them in the water, maybe take a real quick picture and then put them back. We really don't want to harm them because they are, an indicator species, and they've been here forever. So I think some of the bull trout are in that 10 to 12-year-old range. You can catch, our biggest one that was ever taken was about a 41-inch bull trout that was probably 25 pounds. So they get quite big, and we basically call them Kootenai taimen because they're very similar to the taimen in Mongolia.
Oh, right. Yeah, they look like them, right? A little bit too. And the rainbows too are native. So are those not, they don't have quite the same protection, or how's that look, like bull trout versus the red bands?
The red bands, the Center for Biological Diversity did petition to list the red band rainbow. I don't know what status that is in yet. The bull trout are a species of concern under the Endangered Species Act. White sturgeon are an endangered species. So there's different levels of protection. And so far, the red band rainbows do not have it. But, that opens up a whole nother can of worms. Like on the Snake River down in Idaho, they're starting to kill non-native rainbows and brown trout to try to build up the cutthroat fisheries. And you have to wonder about that. I mean, my goodness, are they going to try to kill all the brown trout in the Madison River eventually someday? It's kind of a scary thought because I grew up in Pennsylvania with brown trout, and I think they're great fish. And of course, brook trout are non-native as well, and so there's a lot of different concerns over the native fish management. I think we definitely have to protect them, but it comes down to what the sportsmen desire, I guess.
Yeah, we always go back to, and we try to do this on all of our events. We're doing this in the Euro school we're doing, where we're going to try to find a local conservation group, right? Because, we don't have don't know everything, but if you could find one of those local groups there, they can help shed light on it. And it's all unique, right? It's like you probably are a lot different than down in Idaho, right? Some of those places where, maybe there are some places where brown trout are, maybe not the best, but in some areas, yeah, sure, you're never going to take them out of the Madison or some of these places, because it's like, especially just the fishing, I would imagine the uproar of taking out some of those big browns would be crazy. And at a certain point, you'll look at it historically, like, okay, these are wild fish. How long does it have to be there until it's called a wild fish?
Right.
There's some length of time. Brown trout have been there for what? Probably 100 years, I'd imagine.
Oh yeah. I think they were put in the 40s and 50s. So I would say at least 70 years, when they brought the railroads out is when everything was, that was from an old study when they did the study on when they were still stocking Montana, and they decided to work on mitigation for the streams rather than stock hatchery fish. Jim Vincent was his name. That was a famous study.
Yeah, Jim Vincent. Yeah, he's the guy that basically, I think, started the whole hatchery program out west or something like that, right? Or maybe it was out east. Yeah. Well, this is good. I think there's a lot of ways we could take this. I want to dig in. We're talking the fishing, so we got the rainbows. It sounds like they don't get quite as big, but you've got these big bull trout. But when you're fishing there, I mean, when people come there, is this more a day trip, or are there multi-day trips in the area? What does that look like?
We do up to 5-day trips. Usually in 5 days, you can have a pretty good idea what the fishery's like. To come here and just fish it for a day, if the fishing's off and so forth, I always like to tell people, try to spend more than 1 day, and 3 would be really good. We sell a lot of the 3-day packages, and that way they're seeing a different section of the river. However, some guys say, hey, I want to go where I missed that big fish yesterday. So they're fishing the same water for 3 days, and you can definitely fish it differently. But the Kootenai it's the second largest river in the state, in terms of mean annual flow. So it's not it's averages 150 to 200 yards across. So it's big water, even at minimum flow. And there really isn't many places. I don't think you could walk across it anywhere just because the current would knock you off your feet. But it can be weighted, up to 10,000 CFS. There's places where you get out of the boat and you can work runs and that type of thing. Back when I first started guiding, and the river was doing a lot of the flow fluctuations from 4 to 20 and then back down, I'd start my trips at 2:00 in the afternoon, and we'd fish it until 10:30 at night, because we would try to incorporate that happy hour caddis hatch, which is when you got to see a lot of fish rising. But since that time, they've stabilized flows to where we have a flat flow regime, meaning there's no raising and lowering on a daily basis. They basically have, flat flows throughout the day, and then they'll change it gradually if they want to drop the flows. We've had pretty good dry fly fishing starting in the morning. I mean, you'll have PMD spinners that are on, you'll have some blue-wing olives that might be coming off. And so we do a lot of, a tractor with dropper fishing, like a royal wolf and a black ant work really well. We do a lot of the, chubbies with the bead head and all that type of thing. But we're seeing some real consistent dry fly fishing throughout the day, starting, as early as our pre-runoff to, after the high flows, and we see that kick in usually around the end of June or first part of July. And so you can fish dry flies all day long, which is kind of nice. But, the guides all carry streamer rods in the boat with the right setup. So, I tell people, don't worry about bringing the perfect line and everything. Just rely on the guide. And so, we'll put them in the spots where we know there's some big fish that might be a drop off, a tail out or something like that. And we'll work streamers for a while, and then we'll go back to, dry fly fishing after we pass that spot. So you can basically, you could streamer fish the whole way down. I've had guys do that, but, a lot of people like the diversity of fishing the different ways. And, we'll carry, a nymph indicator rig. We might have a Euro rig, dry fly rig, a dry dropper, so we have almost like a golf bag of clubs. You just, okay, line that up. We're going to run from here down. We're going to do hopper dropper.
Right. That's cool. And so, yeah, so the summertime, it would be good if you want to just pick a time. The weather's good. There's lots of hatches going on. Would it matter, whether it was July, August, September, October, would all those be just as equally good?
They're really good. Moving into the fall is when the water, we have glacial silt in the river. Like right now, it looks, has a lot of glacial green color to it this time of year. But usually, by the end of runoff, you'll lose that milky color, usually by the second or third week in July. And then it just keeps getting clearer and clearer and clearer. And September is one of my favorite times to fish because the water's so clear, and normally the flows are a little bit lower. And it seems like as soon as we start getting our first frost, the fish feed with ferocity more so than they do during the hot dog days of August and that type of thing, so that's really, the fall is my favorite time.
So fall, and then you guys talk about I'm not sure if you guys have the lodge or restaurant, what that looks like. If somebody was coming up there, do you have the full deal there?
Yeah, we built our first cabin in 92. I started guiding on the river in 82. So this is going to be our 41st season. And, as I built my guide service up, having the forestry degree, and, I was marking timber for a little bit when I first got here, but I was actually a timber faller. So we would cut trees in the morning. You'd be done at 1 or 2 o'clock. And then I would have the afternoons to take my kids swimming or something. And then I would guide through the evening hours. And so I was a timber faller when I first got here. And so I got a Forest Service log permit and cut my load of logs. I had a friend that did the log work. And so I think I built my first cabin for under $15,000 in 1992. And we had it in a newsletter, and Meryl Streep, during the movie River Wild, wanted to stay on a cabin along the river, which we had the only one that was a rental. And her agent called me and said, well, Meryl would really like to rent your cabin for the summer. And I had 50 nights booked with my fishermen already.
Oh, wow.
That I'd been talking to for the last 10 years. Hey, we're going to have a cabin eventually. And I had to decline Meryl Streep staying with us.
Oh, you declined Meryl Streep. Look at that.
But what can you do? I mean, I'm not going to turn down repeat customers that have been coming year after year, waiting to stay in the cabin, telling them Hollywood came to town. So
Yeah. Unless there was a price, right? Maybe if there was, they didn't give you an offer you couldn't refuse, right? It wasn't quite that level.
Right. We didn't get that far.
Yeah. There you go.
So yeah, we built our first one in 92. And since that time we added 3 more. So we have 4 cabins. We have roughly close to about 3/4 of a mile of river frontage that I bought when you could still afford river frontage in Montana in the 80s. And at the end of our property, we have 2 more rentals with our restaurant. And we added in 2001, we bought an additional 10 acres, which was adjacent to our hayfield. And we have a couple of cabins down there. So a total of 4 cabins with a on-site restaurant, which is open to the public. And it's closed for a couple of months in the winter, but we'll open it back up around mid-March. And, during the busy time of the summer, we'll do 80 to 100, sometimes over 100 dinners on a weekend night. So it's a busy place, kind of a steakhouse. And we have a staff of about 8 that help us out down there. And then I also have 7 guides that work for me. So it's a busy summer.
Yeah. So you guys are busy. What's the summer like? When do you start getting really busy, and then when does that end?
Usually by mid-June, we start seeing, quite a few people coming in. We'll do maybe, 2-3 boats a day through June. And then in July, it could go to 5 or 6. Sometimes we'll do 8 boats. But, normally, all the stars have to be aligned the right way to have 8 guides be able to help you out at the same time. So we have, 3 to 4 full-time guides and then some part-time guides that help us out.
Yeah, gotcha. And are you guys putting in, like, as far as the drift trips, are you putting in right at your place or below the dam, and then floating down, or what's that look like?
Well, the floatable section of the Kootenai, with the exception of Kootenai Falls, is 50 miles. And so there's 3 to 4 different floats on the Troy reaches below the falls. We also do canyon floats in the section that's directly right below Kootenai Falls through private access.
Where's Kootenai Falls in relation to, say, Libby?
Kootenai Falls is 10 miles west of Libby. And then you have Troy, and then Troy to the Yak is about another 10 miles. And then the Yak to the Idaho line is roughly about 5 miles. So we have a takeout. They just put a takeout in about 6 years ago at the state line. So we're now able to, float the lower canyon. There's 2 canyon stretches with these great big 800-foot walls that go up. One of them is below Kootenai Falls, and the other one is right below, right before you get to the Idaho line. And they're just beautiful sections,
Yeah, gosh, that's amazing. And then you have Highway 2, which is right pretty much going between Troy and, in your place. You got this highway. Is that pretty much the main thoroughfare?
That's the main route. Yeah, Highway 37 starts in Libby and it goes up to Eureka all the way along the reservoir. And Highway 2 coming in from Idaho is where, you would come in from Spokane or Sandpoint, Idaho. And then Highway 2 is the high line that actually goes through Glacier Park and through the high line to Montana, out through Hap and so forth.
Oh, yeah, through Glacier. Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's been a while. Yeah, I've been up in that area, but I've never been right by your place.
Sure. Well, the Flathead, since COVID, the Flathead Valley floated an undersheriff last year, and he said there's 40,000 more people that came into the Flathead Valley. So, the whole Flathead area is just getting overrun with people. And, the nice thing about Libby is there's only roughly about 10% of the ground in Lincoln County is privately owned. The rest is the national forest. So, we're not going to see a tremendous amount of growth because there just isn't a whole lot of private land. But what is private is certainly, getting subdivided, and we're seeing, big hay fields around getting filled up with houses and that type of thing.
Sure, yeah, but you guys are just enough. You're, like you said, remote enough, 600 miles up out there, and it's just it's going to be a while before anything. There's got to be some major changes for you guys become the next. I don't know, what is the fastest growing town in Montana? Like,
I think the Flathead Valley. Somebody was telling me it's growing faster than what we call Los Angeles now.
Yeah, Los Angeles.
That's where all the stoners are moving to. They call them stoners in Montana from watching Yellowstone.
Oh, right, Yellowstone. I haven't caught that yet either. This is great. That's the great thing about Montana is that you guys have it's like all Hollywood wants to go there. It's perfect, right?
Yeah.
It's like that's where everybody. You want to do a film about the outdoors, Montana? It's like go right.
Yep. Well, they just filmed the last series was filmed right in Missoula, which is Missoula is again about a 3-hour drive from us. And so the thing about the Kootenai, I wanted to mention it is a river that hasn't had. I mean, some folks call it famous, but it doesn't have the name that the Madison and the Bighorn and the Missouri have. I mean, it's a great, big Western river and so forth, but we just don't have the traffic because all the outfitters here have to be permitted through the Forest Service. And there's only like 4 of us. And so it isn't like when the fishing's not good other places, for instance, like down in Southwest Montana, all the guides go to the Missouri. And, I heard a few times that it took 2 hours to put a boat in Craig, and so we're not seeing any of that here. We have busy days where the parking lot might be, full of boats and trailers and do-it-yourselfers and rafters and that type of thing. But, overall, we don't see the traffic that a lot of those other Western rivers receive. And that's our saving grace here. You can still experience solitude in a big Western river rather than seeing, 50 other boats up and down the river from where you're out fishing.
That's right. So is there a river, is there a section where you can do like, you guys do like a multi-day float camp overnight in the canyon?
There is sections that we do that, but since, with the cabins and the restaurant, we just haven't really pushed that. But I was looking at doing a stretch. There's some private access right below the falls where I could put a teepee, and we were going to do an overnight tent camp and that type of thing. And the whole area was inundated with poison ivy. So that was one place where we thought about doing it, but then we just after finding out what it cost to take care of poison ivy, we decided not to do that since we didn't own the property anyway. So, but there is, for people that do want to camp along the river, there's a lot of places that you can do it on, it's Forest Service property on islands and that type of thing. And our fly shop does shuttles for folks, and sometimes they'll say, okay, I want it down there by there's basically the stretch above the falls. We do an 8-mile stretch to the re-rig, and then there's another 8 miles. So it's 16. There's about 26 miles that you could float down to the last takeout above Kootenai Falls. So there is possible places where you could camp. And so that would be available to people that want to carry all the gear with them and that type of thing.
Today's episode is sponsored by Stonefly Nets, putting quality before quantity with their handcrafted custom wood landing nets. Charleston, South Carolina native Ethan Eigelhart was bitten by the fly fishing bug in 2014 and shortly thereafter started Stonefly Nets. He now lives in the trout-rich waters of the Ozarks and handcrafts some of the sweetest wooden landing nets you'll see. I've been using these Stonefly nets for quite a while now, and I'm excited to dig into another year. Ethan builds these nets custom, and you can select from 4 sizes and many different wood options. For Ethan, fly fishing is a memory created from a morning on a beautiful stretch of water casting a 3-weight bamboo rod that his grandmother gave to his father, and then he passed to Ethan. Ethan is helping us create the same types of lasting memories every time we're on the water with these classic custom wood nets. You can head over right now to wetflyswing.com/stonefly to check out your custom net right now. That's wetflyswing.com/stonefly, STONEFLY. You support this podcast by clicking through that link to Stonefly. Okay, back to the show. How big is Kootenai Falls? Is there probably put a video or something to that? Is that just like a massive series of falls?
Yeah, it's roughly around a half a mile long stretch. The highest point in the falls is a 30-foot drop. That's the steepest drop. And that was made famous with River Wild. And of course, since that time, it's a playboater's paradise. Kayakers and the big pontoon rafts have been running that. And my son actually, during his junior high days, he had a mentor show him how to safely go over Kootenai Falls in a kayak. And, when my wife and I first went down there to see him do that the first time, to see him go land in the foam and then go under the water and take about 3 to 4 seconds to come back up, your heart's in your throat. But, he wanted to do a motorcycle. And after I had some friends die in motorcycle crashes, I said, no, I'm not going to get you a motorcycle. I'll buy you a kayak. Without even thinking that he would be going over Kootenai Falls. But he was on the Wave Sport kayak team for a couple of years, and he actually went back east and made videos for Wave Sport kayaks. So,
oh wow! So he's doing some. Sounds like he's like a pro kayaker at that level.
Yep, but he got back into fly fishing in his later years, and now he's one of the prettiest spey casters you'll ever see.
Oh, Roy. So you guys do some spey out there? Is that another part of the area?
Yep, we do spey, and he loves to do warm water. So he'll tie up a lot of these bass and pike flies, and he doesn't spey for those. But he and I were fishing, had an evening off, and we went up below the dam, and he took about a 15-pound bull trout on a spey rod, and that was a really nice.
Just swinging flies.
Yep, just swinging flies. Yep, and that's what he loves to do.
That's right. Yeah, the Kootenai, because of the size, it would be a river for the big spey stuff.
Certainly is. Yep.
Yeah, gotcha. Wow. So you guys pretty much, it sounds like you have a little bit of everything. You've got even now with the spay and you've got some other warm water species. And so you got the cabins, the fly shop. If somebody wants to come up there, they can just call you up and say, hey, we want to stay this night, whatever, see if there's availability. And is the cabin like enough room for like multiple people? How big are those?
Yeah, we have two bigger cabins that are like the smallest one is 1,500. Well, it's roughly 2,000 square feet with the porches, and it has two separate bedrooms and full kitchens. The other one is even bigger than that. So there's two bigger cabins that you could put 4 to 6 people in, and then we have two smaller cabins that have the two queen beds separated by an enclosed bath. So we can do groups of up to 14 people, and then we basically do meals down at the restaurant. So we run a full service package, including food, daily guiding and lodging for $500 a person based on double occupancy. And that's been a very popular package.
Right. No, it sounds cool. And I always think, like you said, the stuff down south or around Montana where it's busier. I mean, the thing you guys offer is you've got this area, which is amazing, just kind of this wild, it's probably less people. Maybe you're not getting the rainbows quite as big, but it sounds like there's a chance that you could hook into. I mean, is there could you hook into a bigger rainbow?
Oh yeah, when you streamer fish in the Kootenai, you're catching fish anywhere from 14 to 35 inches. So you never know. And the big rainbows are hard to hold. I mean, my head guide Joe last year caught a rainbow on a hopper dropper rig that was, I think, 32 inches. And that was a great fish. And we would have lost that fish if the angler had not known how to play a big fish. But just the location of where that fish was hooked, he could have made runs around big boulders and that type of thing. But he just, they took their time landing this fish, and it was in great shape when they released it. But you don't always land these big fish because they'll just rip you a new one. And some people don't, they might have the line wrapped around your fighting butt or whatever. I've seen all the different ways you can lose fish, but they'll hit you so fast that if you have your rod down and don't have that tip up, they'll just
You're gone.
Yeah, they're just gone. I've had them break 2x tippet just on the hit, so it's amazing.
Yeah, gotcha. So there is a potential, and I guess like we said, these are red band trout. There's the connection to the steelhead, so there's that. They've got the genetics that they're a big fish, and if you hook a 30-inch fish. What are the chances? I mean, you have a better chance hooking a bigger fish doing the streamers versus the dry or Euro stuff, or is it all equal? You never know when you're going to get a big one.
In the evenings, when we have the big caddis activity, that's when you'll see some of the bigger rainbows come up for dries because, they'll grab, one rise, they'll be able to get 5 or 6 caddis pupa in one rise because they're just all matted together in certain places. But streamer fishing is by far the most effective way to catch the big rainbows. And to have the right, sinking lines, we use shooting heads of different proportions and so forth, depending on, the water that we're fishing. We use a type 4 sink tip line. And, Jeff Currier was up here fishing with me a while back, and we used the Scientific Angler Stillwater line. And Jeff is probably the best fisherman I've ever been around. You learn a lot just watching him, but he was fishing these jigs and caught a beautiful, I think it was an 8 or 9 pound rainbow just in the home pool here. And he really can. And all he was using was a Scientific Angler Stillwater Camo, which is actually a clear line, which you can grease it, it'll float. You can let it sink, but if you have something heavy on it, it just goes right down with it. But you have more of a straight connection to that jig than you do with a sink tip where you have a great big belly in your line. So that was really interesting to watch him do that. And I applied that same method when I was fishing Iceland last August. And I was the high fish count on the Kootenai River in Iceland. I caught 13 Atlantic salmon, including one fish that was like 18 pounds. So watching him enable me to do that in Iceland.
Amazing. We just had Jeff on, and we're doing a little mini season series on it's called Traveled, and he was our first guest, episode number 1.
Right. I think I saw that. Yep.
Yeah, and it was good. He dug into it. It's pretty cool because he started out, he was just down south, but he just moved out to Wisconsin and across the country. But that guy's obviously, I think we're at like 400 and some odd episodes. He's at like 400 some odd species.
I know. Isn't that something?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Okay, good. Well, let's jump back in and just kind of start to think about, as we take it out of here. I just want to focus on, again, we're putting that trip. So I could see coming up here, and even you guys have groups. So if we had a group of people, or if it was a single person, if somebody was just like, hey, I want to stop by, I'm going to be in the area, maybe doing something, I'm doing traveling up to Glacier, they could swing by, call you and say, hey, can I get a room?
Yep.
They get the cabin,
Yep.
maybe get a day trip. And if they said, hey, we're going to be there and say, late August, maybe there's a hatch going on. What do you tell them as far as gear? Is it just your typical kind of, trout stuff, that sort of thing?
Well, basically, with the amount of people that don't want to carry all their gear, we're doing a lot of, on our guided trips, we provide gear. I'm a Winston Pro staffer, so, I carry Winston rods in the boat. All the guides have, rods in their boat and so forth. But, basically for people that do want to use their own gear, 9 foot for a 5 weight is your dry fly rig. I mean, I use an 8.5 4 for a Winston. I use like a softer rod that's just a little bit more forgiving for people that are heavy handed with their strikes. But 9 for a 5 is average, maybe a 9.6 or a 9.7 to throw streamers or nymphs. And, I carry a 10-foot Euro rod in the boat as well. But, the 10-foot 2 weight, Winston makes those. I have a Super 10 that I was using over in Iceland that was really good. And those are great rods, to have the light tip on it so you can actually feel that nymph, when a fish takes it is pretty important. So that's basically the gear that you would need. And we provide the flies. So it isn't like, you come into the shop, like I've heard other places where, you'll buy $60 worth of flies and you can return them at the end of the day if you don't use them. And, most people don't. So we don't push that. We just provide flies. And, if somebody uses a few more, that's fine, whatever.
Sure. That's it. So this is pretty, and like I said, if you're coming there in August or July or whenever, you could call. You get the shop, you've got the fly shop, the Kootenai Angler,
Yep.
and just get a rundown. Here's what's going on with the hatches, throw some flies, maybe stop by the shop.
Yeah, and we can a lot of times do last minute guides, as well, because I have guys that are, they let me know when they're available and that type of thing. And, if we're doing, package trips with 3 to 4 days with groups, we always have other guides that are available to do day trips, so pretty flexible in that department.
Cool. No, it sounds like a good trip, and one of those things where, like you said, you're just off the beaten path just enough to keep it, not quite as busy. So can you find when you're floating the river out there, do you find places where you kind of get your own area and you could, basically not have a bunch of boats floating by you, or is there always some people around during the floats?
Surprisingly enough, even during the peak season, which is probably August and early September, because we don't do the same stretches all the time, but there's sections where you won't see another boat. I mean, we have private access going into a canyon below Kootenai Falls, and the only other boat you would possibly see would be a motorboat that would come up all the way from Troy. That section is just beautiful, and you might see another boat after you get past where the public access is in Troy. But the Kootenai, I would say on average during the peak season, if you see more than 6 or 7 boats in the course of a full day fishing, that's going to be the exception to the rule, And a lot of days you might, of course, when we have a large party out there, we don't put 6 boats on the same section. I mean, we split up our boats, maybe put 2 to a section. And, normally you'll have the timing difference, or somebody might, and all the guides on the Kootenai, there's other outfitters that work here. And, we get along, and we have guides that are independent contractors that may work for 3 different outfitters. And so we know everybody, and it isn't like, you hear about the, sometimes pretty almost fights that happen on some of the other rivers where somebody comes in and goes right over their water. That doesn't happen on the Kootenai. Now, as we get more people moving in here, we might have to, let people know, hey, well, this is how we do it here. And so if we're fishing this hole, you might want to go on the other side of the river. I really haven't had to do that except but a few times in the last 10 years or so. And, you have to be nice about that,
Yeah, I hear you. No, it sounds really cool. It sounds like a place that would be, whether you have a big group or just a small group, it sounds like you can it'd be a place you can get away from some of the crowds,
right,
and the diversity too of types of techniques, catching the rainbows. You got a shot at a big bull trout, even though, I mean, it's not against the rule. You can't, or describe that a little bit. You can't target them.
Well, what it is, it's called, when you're streamer fishing on the Kootenai, the population of bull trout is pretty high. And I would say, just like, for instance, the other day, we caught 2 bull trout. We didn't catch any rainbows. We were fishing deep water for rainbows primarily because, that's the target species. And if you catch a bull trout, it's called what Fish, Wildlife, and Parks says as incidental take. And so these incidental takes happen. But if there are bull trout staging the spawn in a creek mouth in 2 feet of water, a 30-inch fish, and you see the big white margin fins, you're not supposed to cast to that fish. And I'm sure some of that still happens, with some people. I don't know any other guides that are doing anything like that, but you'll get people that see these big fish and they might be trying to catch them with worms or something. I mean, who knows? And so that's something that you can't do. But, these bull trout are in 15 to 20 feet of water. And, there's no distinction on, okay, well, I hope a bull trout does. I mean, it's just one of those things. If a bull trout eats your streamer, that happens. And it happens pretty frequently.
Yeah. So you could say, like, at your shop, you could say, hey, you want to go bull trout fishing? Here's a bull trout. I mean, you can go fishing for bull trout, right?
We don't say that. In fact, I try not to post bull trout on Instagram or Facebook. However, I remember some years ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I posted a nice bull trout and, I actually got unfriended and I tried to explain, hey, the Kootenai, and this is somebody from Southwest where they didn't really understand the whole situation up here. And, that's where social media sometimes, people don't understand where you're coming from because they don't know what the river's like and so forth. But basically, bull trout, we don't target the species. If somebody says, hey, well, I'd like to catch a bull trout, I said, well, we streamer fish for rainbows and there's a pretty good chance you might catch a bull trout. That's basically how we have to say it. So.
Gotcha.
You can't say that you're guiding for bull trout in Montana.
Yeah, there you go.
But I will say there were several in the IF4 films before the fly fishing shows. They have the film on Friday night. There were at least 3 shows made of Kootenai River bull trout that were in the reservoir that spawn in the Elk River in British Columbia where they can target them. They're making big money targeting Montana bull trout that spawn in the Elk River up in British Columbia. So to me, that just kind of, I don't understand why they have this big thing in Montana when just across the border, even our Montana fish in the reservoir are being caught with frequency by targeted fishermen.
I see. The same fish, so literally fish that are in Montana are migrating upriver.
Yeah, same fish. Yeah, in British Columbia. They don't have that ruling. So.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, we did an episode a while back with the, I guess the person, with the Fly Fusion magazine that
right.
That IF4 he talked about. I don't think we talked about the Kootenai, but we did talk about bulls a little bit. And actually it took us up to northern BC, up to the upper Skeena Basin where they have bull trout,
right.
Where they're focusing. That was up there in another cool area. I mean, there's so many, you're in one of those spots. I think that's the Kootenai. I think it does, you mentioned earlier, it doesn't have the name of the Madison, but I think just from the outside, it does have an equal name as far as, it's as well known, I believe. The Madison is probably the most well known, but it's right up there. You know what I mean? And It has less pressure, which is a good selling point.
Right.
If you're, I don't even know the Madison. It's been a while. I haven't been down there, and I can imagine you hear the stories like you said. If you know the area, you got a guide. I'm sure the guides can get you into some, get away from the crowds a little bit. But man, I can imagine that's a tough one.
Yep, that's for sure.
Nice. Well, we touched on a little bit. We didn't go deep into the, the techniques and stuff, but it sounds like really it depends on what you want to do. If we were coming up there and you have a dry fly rod, maybe a Euro rod, maybe bring the spey, right? Talk about,
sure.
Bring like your son, bring the trout spey, maybe swing some flies for rainbows, hook a couple bull trout. And those are the species, right?
We also have, there's probably 10% West Slope cutthroat, which are also a native species. They're different than the Yellowstone cuts. And they grow a little bit fatter, I think.
They love dry flies.
Yeah, and they love dries. They don't quite fight. They don't come out of the water like the rainbows do. Just to give you an example, you hook a rainbow here, he's going to jump 5, 6, sometimes 8 or 10 times. And the other rainbows in Montana don't jump like that. I mean, these are just really acrobatic. They fly out of the water when you hook them.
Yeah. Well, that's the red side I know on the Deschutes. You'll be out there fishing for trout. And sometimes you will hook a steelhead, because obviously there's steelhead there. But sometimes you'll get a trout that pulls. It'll be that same pull, like feels like a steelhead tug.
Sure.
And you're like, oh man, is that a steelhead or is that a red side? Right? Because they're just powerful. And that could easily be a 16, 15-inch fish that's doing that.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. And then your river is 10,000 plus CFS. So now you got the flow. They get out in the current, and I can see why you'd be toast, right?
Right. And these fish as well, like on some of the rivers like the Madison, they're pounding the banks, different things like that, where they're fishing banks a lot. These Columbia red bands are right out in the middle of a deep run in fast water. And it's amazing where they hold compared to some of the other rainbows that I've fished for on other rivers. I mean, we'll be fishing the middle of a run that might be 15, 20 feet deep in big boulders. And there'll be fish just coming up in that fast water. It's just amazing to see the strength of these fish. And that goes back to, their native strain.
Exactly. Well, let's take it out of here. We've been trying to do the 2-minute drill segment. Forces us to take it out of here. And I got a few questions if you want to jump into this, and this will wrap up the show if that sounds good to you.
Sure.
We'll start the timer here. So we'll just kind of give you a few, see if we can get some quick answers on some quick questions. So we talked about the historical stuff. Is there a good resource online or somewhere out there where people can dig more into that Kootenai, that part of the area? You mentioned the museum. I'd imagine they probably have a website. Are there any other things you'd mention?
Well, there's a Libby Chamber Commerce website and the Libby Heritage Museum, and of course Glacier Country, but that basically deals with most of the flathead and that type of thing. Sources of the river. It's a Dave Thompson journal. If somebody really wants to get into the history, it's a great book.
Sources of the river. Perfect. I'll put that in the show notes. What about a conservation group? Who would you recommend up there? We talked about some of this stuff. Is there a local group up there or somebody you'd recommend?
Yeah, we have a Trout Unlimited chapter up here, and I was actually a regional director on that, as well as the Fishing Outfitters Association in Montana. Now, we don't meet very often. We're going to have a spring meeting when they're talking about doing some nutrient enhancement where they're going to actually drip phosphorus and nitrogen into the Kootenai to add more nutrients, which is what Idaho's been doing. And so we're going to be meeting this spring and talking about that because it's slated to happen in 2024 next year. So that ought to be good.
Nice. Well, and then I saw something. Was John Gierach, was he also up in there on a trip?
Yeah. John was up fishing with me. He's fished with me. I took him up on the Elk River before there were any outfitters up there in the late 80s. And then he went up with some other outfitters over the years. And I've known him for a very long time. I like his dry sense of humor.
Yeah, me too.
And his, the way that he writes. And so he was up here in September. I think it was 2 years ago, and had a great time. He was amazed at the strength of the fish. He says, well, this is another 16, 17 incher. It hit the net at 12 inches,
Yeah, right. That's it. So what was he coming up? What was the thing he was excited to get up there for, or the last time he was up there?
He only fished up in Canada. He never really fished the Montana side. So I finally got him down here, and he loved my dog. I have a German short hair that goes with me in the boat when I have a single customer. And of course she squeals when you have a pretty good fish on. I have to keep her tied up in the back or she'd be all over it. But he got a kick out of my dog, and he's just a great guy to have in the boat and, listen to his stories and all that type of thing. He enjoyed I played a little bluegrass for him, so he enjoyed that.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the bluegrass because we have the Sheldon Mountain Boys, right? You guys just came out with, you have an album out there.
Yeah, it's been out almost 10 years now.
Oh, wow. 10 years. Yeah. So there you go. So you play the banjo?
Yep, I do. And I entertain for the fly fishing shows in Edison, Atlanta, and Denver and Pleasanton, California. So.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Oh, so you're going to be at the shows this year?
Yep. I'm going to be leaving here next week to do the Edison show.
Good. Oh, Edison, right. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to make it out east, but I definitely will see you at Pleasanton this year. I'll stop by and say hi.
Good.
Yeah. Well, we had back in 317, which was probably about 100 episodes, we had Brandon Moltzen on from up north of you in Canada. He played a little lick on his banjo. Do you have an opportunity to bust something out here today?
I do. Yeah, sure. All right, here we go. There's a well-beaten path on that old mountainside. I wondered when I was a lad, and I wandered alone to the place I call home. No Blue Ridge Hills so far away. Oh, I love those hills of old Virginia, and no Blue Ridge Hills where I've been born. When I die, won't you bury me on that old mountainside, far away, my Blue Ridge cabin home. Oh, now my mind wanders back to that old ramshackle shack, far away in those Blue Ridge Hills. And my mother and dad, they are lying there to rest. They're sleeping in peace together there. Oh, I love those hills of Virginia, and those Blue Ridge Hills where I've been born. When I die, won't you bury me on that old mountainside, far away, my Blue Ridge cabin home. Oh, far away, my Blue Ridge cabin home.
Wow. That was amazing.
There you go.
Nice. That was perfect. So Shelton Mountain Boys, can we get something in the show notes as well if they want to listen to some other stuff there? I'm not sure if you're on Spotify or something like that.
You know, we're not. We just have the CD, but I could link them to I have another band I'm playing with called Boulder Creek, and maybe I'll send you a link to our Facebook page.
Oh, yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, anything we can do so people can follow up and have a listen, that'd be great. And then, great. Well, anything else before we head out here? That was the perfect the wrap up, I think. Maybe just give a shout out here. We're kind of into 2023. Anything big going on for you this year? Or another just a good year of guiding out there?
Well, yeah, along with, running the business here, I went to Cuba, Iceland, and the Amazon. And this year we're going to do an Amazon trip again. And then also I'm going to be going to Iceland again to the Kootenai River, where I help, with some entry-level anglers that a good client of mine takes me over there to help with his group, and a lot of fun. And so I'm starting to get into this hosting, and I'm going to be hosting 2 weeks of Cuba fishing through Avalon Outdoors, and that's going to be the first 2 weeks in May of 2024. So I had one of my best saltwater trips. I've been saltwater fishing for, well over 30 years, and I caught tour permit in one day down in Cuba last May, and I was just amazed at how good the Cuba fishery is.
Right. That's awesome. Well, maybe we'll have to circle back around and check in with you at a later point on some of that stuff. That's great. You're getting into all those trips. Well, I guess we'll leave it there for today. We'll send people out to goflyfishmontana.com if they have questions for you. And yeah, Dave, I think this has been great. I appreciate you shedding some light on that part of the country, Montana. It really sounds like it would be a great trip for anybody heading out there. So yeah, just appreciate all your time today.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
So there it is, making our way across the country, across the northern part of the country, and we've been on the road a while, and we are excited and a little bit tired, but we're rolling into this area, and we're going to grab a cabin for the week and kick back, and we got some fishing ahead of us tomorrow. So excited to dig into this one, wetflyswing.com/416. 416, that's the best way to get some show notes, get all of our links and some good stuff. There'll be a video over there as well. I'm thinking a video. What is the cool video from this one? We're going to have to surprise you on that. Check it out right now. 416. Listener shout out before we get out of here. Ryan Putty. Ryan made a vote for Stillwater and saltwater episodes. More of that stuff for the podcast. And Ryan's hailing from the Puget Sound area. Ryan connected with us through the email list, and want to thank Ryan in advance. Actually thank him right now for the support over the years, and want to let you know, Ryan, that yes, we have you covered on the Stillwater. We got Phil Roy on for the Littoral Zone podcast series, so he's going to be serving up crazy podcast Stillwater content for you. And we definitely will be doing more Puget Sound episodes as well, since you checked in here, so stay tuned for that. If you're listening now and you want to get a shout out here, maybe let us put together an episode for you, the best way to do that is to reach out to me on email, dave@wetflyswing.com, or on social anytime. Send me a DM, and I would love to hear from you. Would love to put together an episode that gives you a little more value, and maybe even a shout out here, likely a shout out. If you give me a heads up, I definitely will be doing that. So right now, if you haven't connected with me, do it right now. I'd love to hear for where you're coming from, whether that's the U.S. or abroad. Always love to connect. Let's take a look where we're heading next. Okay, where are we heading next? And we are serving up some good stuff. As we mentioned, the Littoral Zone coming in this Thursday. We got Phil Roy, and this is going to be a great episode. I think this one is going to be one where he is actually interviewing somebody else. So excited for that. This is going to be the first time that has happened. And next week we're heading to Norway. We're heading to Norway to dig into some of the good stuff. We got Josh Bond on next week, and we got a bonus podcast, another podcaster on next week. So I'm not going to give that away right now, but we got some big stuff, and I'm not even looking into further. But man, okay. As we head into March and this year, as we really dig into it, I'm excited, very excited to dig into this and share what we have coming. So we just launched the Euro School, and actually tonight, just realizing this, tonight, as this goes live, if you're here listening to this live, tonight we are announcing the winner of the giveaway event. Tonight we are announcing the winner of the Euro School. This is the big trip we're doing out to the South Fork of the Snake, giving away a huge trip, a huge prize pack. I think this is probably the most products we've given away. The value is crazy. So, and the great thing about this is we do this live event today, later on today. We always give a few bonus products. So if you're interested in maybe getting a chance at a reel, it could be, I'm not quite sure what it's going to be, but it's going to be something. It's going to be something. So stay tuned if you want, even if you missed out on the big event, stay tuned tonight and grab us on our live event on Facebook. You can just go to Facebook, Wet Fly Swing, and you should be able to see us enjoying that there. I'll also put a link in the show notes as well. All right, well, I hope that you get a chance. This trip we're giving away is actually going to also be what we call, this is our school, but it's also a hosted trip. So if you're interested in getting on the water with me, going to one of the most amazing places in the country, and also upping your Euro nymph game by basically two of the best people we have in the country, in the world, in Stillwater, the gold medal winner, this is the place you want to go. We got a limited number of slots, so right now you can check that out. You can go to wetflyswing.com/Euroschool, and that's the best place you can sign up and actually get a slot, and you can actually reserve your slot right now. So we got limited slots, but if you want to do that, get on it right now. And I would love to see you on the water, but if I don't, check in with me online. Would definitely love to hear from you online or on the water, as always, but I hope you are having a good morning, a good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world, and I appreciate you supporting this podcast and looking forward to catching up with you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.
Mama rock me. South of Roanoke, I caught a trucker from Philly, had a long night smoke. He was headed west to the Cumberland Gap, Johnson City, Tennessee. I gotta get a move on and I'm fit for the sun. I hear my baby calling my name and I know that she's the only one. And if I die in Raleigh, at least I'll live free. Rock me, mama, like the wagon wheel. Rock me,